But when I'm looking at records, I'm looking at both the nursing documentation, but I'm also looking at the tech side of it, and if their part of the story is not told, then it's not really fair to them either. So it's up to the tech really to make sure and to communicate and be a part of that story.
Clock in, scrub up, and join us behind the red line. You're listening to First Case, a perioperative podcast bringing you exciting interviews, engaging discussions, and innovative solutions that are changing the way patients receive surgical care. Each episode, we talk to frontline staff, perioperative leadership, and nursing entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the back table to the boardroom, from wheels in to wheels out, we tackle the real-life issues affecting the OR. Whether you're tuning in for surgical service education or inspiration, we're glad you're here. And now it's time to roll back and start the first case.
On this week's episode of First Case, we are speaking with Anna Gray, RNFA and legal nurse consultant from California. And today we are talking about something that nurses dread more than they appreciate, and it is our documentation. It's not the best, is it?
It's the reason I am not a nurse.
But it is something that is seen as a chore, something that is seen as a task, and something that is seen that pulls us away from patient care. And yet, there is a way to look at our documentation as a way to help our patients and ensure that we can show that we did the right thing for them. And so Anna is going to really enlighten us today, I think.
Yes, she got me on my soapbox again.
Again, you need to stay off your soapbox. You only get so many episodes this season.
But the why, because if you didn't write it down in the operating room, it didn't happen.
Exactly. So don't go anywhere. We will be right back with Anna Gray.
Hi, I'm Chris Blevins.
And I'm Melanie Perry.
From the studios of Healthcare HQ, you're listening to First Case.
Joining us now is Anna Gray, RNFA and legal nurse consultant from California. And today we are diving into the whys behind documentation and why it is so important for ourselves and for our patients that we are documenting correctly. And Anna, what better person to have talk to us today than a legal nurse consultant when we are talking about the importance of documentation. So Anna, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you guys for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm excited.
Well, I'm excited to have you. And honestly, I have to tell all of you listening, be careful what you wish for, because when you comment on a LinkedIn post and say you would like to, be a guest on the show, you've got a topic you want to talk about, or you think this would be really cool, I will respond. And then you will find yourself behind the mic like Anna does.
I love it.
Yeah. Anna's like, hey, exactly. This will be really cool. And I'm like, okay, yeah. I like this. Let's go.
I know.
So,
I'm a fan
Anna,
of LinkedIn.
Yeah. So LinkedIn, there's a lot of benefits, including getting me connected with experts who can help us learn and answer those why questions. So Anna, as we get into this conversation today, why don't you just start off with telling everybody a little bit about who you are?
Sure. Thanks again for having me. I really appreciate being here. I'm excited to chat with you about the why. Okay, so my background is kind of a little bit of everything. So I started out as a surgical tech. I had gotten my bachelor's degree. I did, yes. I got my bachelor's degree in something I couldn't really use. It was in exercise physiology. But it helped me because it was a health science way back when.
Yes.
So I couldn't do anything with my degree, and I figured a friend of a friend was going through tech school. And I thought, okay, that sounds interesting. So I went through tech school and I got a job. That was in the days when you got a job right out of school. And I had an amazing experience as a surgical tech. And here I had all these prereqs done for nursing school. And I said, you know what? I'm going to go to nursing school just because it makes sense. I have all these prereqs done. I think I needed one. And I just want to make more money doing the same thing. Well, little did I know, once I went through school, I worked full time as a tech, working 3 to 11 as I went through nursing school. And I got a nursing school, and that was the end of my scrubbing career at the time. And I was so disappointed. Nobody told me that was going to end. I thought for sure I would just continue to scrub and just make more money, in air quotes. But no, I decided, all right, I'm going to be a circulator. So I was a circulator for a few years. I moved hospitals, and then the hospital I ended up was a community hospital, and I was right down the street from my house. And I started asking all of these questions. Why do you do it this way? This is appropriate for today, right? Why do you do it this way? Why do you do it that way? I was young. I was a brand new mom. And they said, hey, we've got a 3 to 11 charge position. You want it? And I was like, oh, I could make more money. So I said yes in my 20s. And I jumped, and my ignorance, of course. So I jumped right in, and I jumped into management. I was a clinical manager for 3+ years. I adopted my 2 kids. It was all this big transition, new mom, manager. And let me tell you, it was a nightmare. It was, I had learned so much in that role, but I don't think I would go back and do it again. That being said,
I can appreciate that. Absolutely.
I really, I learned a lot. I mean, it was like the wild, wild west where I worked. So I moved on. I ended up still in management. I became a clinical director for a brand new surgery center from the ground up. It was like, oh, this is fresh. We can hire the cream of the crop. It's just a shell. We can, put things where we want to put things. So that in itself was an amazing experience. Was a clinical manager for 3 years. And then I said, okay, I think I need to get out of the OR, because I was 6 years of being in management. And I was babysitting, and I was like, I don't want to babysit anymore. I don't want to babysit surgeons. I don't want to babysit staff. Let's just make a lateral move. Plus, I didn't really want to upset the administrator, because I had followed her along those same 6 years. And I was like, the only way for me to jump was to go in a completely different department, because, the OR is a very small world. And I live just north of LA, and it's just a small world. So I jumped laterally. I took a job as a senior clinical systems analyst. So the director of IT at this very big hospital said, okay, well, I can teach you the IT side of this, but I really can't teach you the management side. And that's why we're hiring, because you have this management experience. This is a lot of project management. I was tech savvy and computer savvy-ish. We weren't using an EMR. I'd never used an EMR, actually. And here I got this job as a senior clinical systems analyst. And the only reason I could call myself a senior was because that bachelor's degree in health science. So,
gotta love it.
Yeah. So I was the only RN in the IT department for a good 5 years. And I could speak both languages. We used Cerner there. They would have a problem. Nursing would have a problem on the floor. And so this was my opportunity really to understand how different departments worked, because I had gone to nursing school, but I was working as a tech. I got a job as a circulating nurse. So I stayed in the OR. I was one of those ones where I didn't go work on the floor. I was tried and true in the OR. So actually this IT position gave me my chops when it comes to ICU and how floor nursing works. And so I was able to kind of understand the workflow a little bit better than when I was a young, naive, nursing student. So I did that for a good 5 years. And then I went home and spent time with my kids while they got their way through junior high. And once that happened, I said, okay, I think I got to go back. Yeah, I built a business.
Oh, man.
I know. I built a business, and then I was like, insurance. My husband at the time was also an independent contractor, and, we had 2 kids, and it was like, all right, benefits, probably a good idea. So there was one hospital I had never worked at before, and I had a friend who was an RNFA there who said, you should come here. It's a great place. It's fast paced. It's a trauma hospital. And I think you do really great. I think that this would be a great fit. So I did that almost 9 years ago. Here I was like, I'm not going into management. I just want to show up and be an employee. I don't want to babysit. I just want to show up and be an employee. And that's what I did. So I went back to circulating, and I have to be honest with you guys. First time I was like, wait, when was the last time I put a Foley in? I remember this very vividly. And I was like, 10 years ago was the first time I had the last time I had put a Foley in. And it was very humbling to me, but it was also like riding a bike, which was very refreshing. Yeah. So I was circulating, and my kids are grown. They're in high school. And I thought, this was the only hospital I'd ever been at where RNFAs were hired by the facility. And my friend, who I had known since I was a tech, was there. And she said, you should absolutely do this. We were really busy. There was an opportunity for me to get my RNFA hours in very easily. So I did. I joined a program. I jumped in. I got my hours very quickly, right before COVID. And I've been working at RNFA since. So no management, no circulating.
And you're sort of scrubbing.
Yes, exactly. And I got
You
back,
always come back, man.
I got back to the sterile field. Yeah. So I've been working as an RNFA since 2019. I became certified a couple years ago, which was by far the hardest thing I've ever done.
I've heard that is very challenging.
They dropped the test right before I became certified. So I did this new thing called a portfolio, which was very, very difficult for someone who had been out of school for many years. But I became certified. So a certified RNFA. Currently, I work 2 days a week because I started my legal nurse consulting business about 2 years ago. And I really jumped in with both feet in this legal nurse consulting business, so much that I got really busy and I backed off one day in the OR. So 2 days in the OR. The rest of the time, I'm doing legal nurse consulting and my podcast. So I am super happy. Both my kids are now adults, and here we are, full circle.
And here we are,
living the dream.
But
yes,
okay,
but I've had my hand in everything. Let me tell you.
But that's
and
actually,
that helps.
yeah, it does help, and that's honestly, for any of us who have been in healthcare for any length of time, it's a lot of us have those same backgrounds of I was here and I got burnt out, or I couldn't do this anymore, or my life situation changed and I needed some flexibility, or I needed this, that, or the other. And one of the beautiful things about healthcare is that there's opportunity for a variety of things. And for those of us who are entrepreneurially minded, there is a lot of potential for blazing our own trail and changing healthcare for the better, as the three of us can all attest to, because we are some of those people. But as we talk about documentation and we think about, we do it all the time, whether we like it or not, we got to fill it out. And maybe sometimes we're absentmindedly just checking blocks and not even really paying attention. It's actually important. So let's start there. Why is it so important?
Well, I was trying to think about why it's so important without it being a really boring answer. And here's what I came up with. Because we're not boring. We gotta choose it. So we gotta love that. Okay. We're gonna bling it out here. So really what it does is you develop a story, right? Our patients go through our perioperative journey, right? It's a story. How do we tell the story on paper or electronically? That's really the basics of it. Why are we doing this? We're telling a story of what our patient's journey is. And that's really the gist of it. If we're missing boxes, if we're not doing something, then we're missing parts of the story. And if you think about it in that way, it makes it a little bit easier. I love to teach. I love as an RNFA, we like to teach and be nice. We're nice teachers sometimes, but I like to explain things like that in a story. Okay, so why, the foundation of why are we doing it the way we're doing it? If you understand the why, then it becomes incredibly easy. You're not memorizing things, right? You're not checking off boxes. And so I've always taken that approach, is really understanding the foundation. So when it comes to, working in the operating room, we want to understand why. But as far as documentation goes, it's really telling the story of our patient's journey, right? It's not checking off boxes. It's like, what happened to this patient? So then on the legal side of it, when I'm looking at documentation, if we're missing pieces, we're missing the story, and that really comes into play when you're protecting your own self, even though your story, the story, you've walked the story, you've been a part of this patient's story. If it's not, you could just say, if it's not charted, it's not done. Right?
Exactly. It didn't happen if it's not written down.
Well, Anna, I have to tell you, and on the scheme of weird degrees, right? As a certified surgical technologist, my bachelor's degree is in criminal justice.
That's amazing. I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up with a criminal investigator as a father.
Yeah. Wow.
I thought I was going to go into forensic pathology.
Were you ever able to get out of anything when you got in trouble? I just have to know.
Oh, God, no. But I can debate like nobody's business.
Yeah, I bet.
In our house, you were not innocent until proven guilty. You put on one heck of a defense every time. Yeah, that's an entire.
That's another story for another day.
Right, totally.
Absolutely. But, from a criminal background, like criminal justice, and I loved all of the, legal research and things that I had to do. But if you didn't document it, it didn't happen. And at the end of the day, what's not documented isn't going to hold up in a courtroom. Right. And so there's that relationship, that nurse's documentation that is legally admissible, kind of like the surgeons. I always think of, so as a surgical technologist, like we don't do the documentation, which is one of the reasons why I went to surgical technology and not nursing. Right. To be completely honest.
Yeah, I get it. Yep.
I don't have to document and ding, ding, but I always hear the surgeon's notes, right? Because while you all are off in recovery and then getting into pre-op for the next patient, the surgeon is usually dictating their note, which God bless the person who has to translate that. But I don't even want to know. But is there some relationship between the nursing documentation and then the surgeon's operative note? I mean, because don't you guys kind of have to correlate?
Yeah, it's a good question. It goes back to the story, right? He or she is telling their part of the story. And their part of the story is their part of the story. Even though they try to include our part of the story, which they do on a very minimal level, it is our responsibility to tell the rest of the story. So yes, they absolutely correlate in that it have to be the same story, right? And that's what we look at as legal nurses. We look at the op report and we look at the nursing documentation and we see if the story matches or if there are any gaps in the story.
Right?
Yeah. I
That's
wonder.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. You hope that the stories match. And 99% of the time they do match. They're typically missing part of it, or their recollection of the story may be a little bit different than ours. So it's important for us as nurses to have our side of the story. And even the techs, being a part of that story and using their own, even though you're not documenting, using your communication skills to say, hey, can you just make sure that that's in the record? That you're part of the team. And I will tell you that on paper, you are absolutely part of the team and part of that story. And I think it may be because I have a tech background. But when I'm looking at records, I'm looking at both the nursing documentation, but I'm also looking at the tech side of it, and if their part of the story is not told, then it's not really fair to them either. So it's up to the tech really to make sure and to communicate and be a part of that story.
Well, and when I teach my students, we're the ones we play telephone kind of with the surgeon, right? So specimens, when the surgeon says what that specimen is to be labeled, we're the ones communicating that with the circulator. Or when when we are communicating EBL, we're communicating how much medication we've used or how much normal saline, those things. If we're not communicating that correctly, you all are not documenting it correctly, and we're liable for that. We're also like an eyewitness to the story that you all are documenting. Yeah. So it takes a team, sure.
One of my favorite surgical tech practices, and I've not always worked with surgical techs who have done this, but the ones who do, I absolutely love. When the surgeon is listing off specimens, they usually will grab a patient marker or skin marker or something, and they are writing it on the back table.
Yes,
so that we know exactly.
Yes,
and I can, if I don't understand or whatever, I can go look, especially when you're doing lymph nodes or you're doing something else and they are just all over the place. Having that written documentation, yes. Okay, the stuff on your blue back table cover is not going to be in the chart, but it's going to be transposed from that back table cover into mine. So it's incredibly helpful to have that written down, right?
Yeah, which also goes to the tech's ability to translate that, or their anatomical understanding and knowing how to spell what their specimen is.
Girl, do not get me on my soapbox.
She's got too many soapboxes.
Don't start
that's why we're here, because we are the same people. Yeah, no.
Yes. You do not know that a chole is the beginning medical term for gallbladder. Oh, don't start. Yes.
Yeah. So that good. I'm so glad. But it's not necessarily in the record, but you're as a nurse going to be translating what they've written down. And if it says Coley with the K, the nurse is like, what is that? Yeah. So there you go.
No, we all want to look like the professionals that we are, for sure. So we definitely need to know how to spell. Yeah. I have Googled a few things before I've written them in my chart,
of course,
because I don't have a clue. What did they just say? Let me type in what I think I heard.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. I've done it.
So I'm curious, because you have looked at hundreds of charts, I'm sure, and you have had to be that expert witness or provided insight into the chart to explain it from the clinical language into what maybe, attorneys and whatnot can understand. What have you seen?
Spill the tea.
So I do a lot of behind the scenes work. So a lot of it is really going back to the story, is telling the story to an attorney. So first of all, I'll look through the records. Example, we're going to take a total hip replacement, right? And we've got a nerve palsy. I'll read the op report. I'll read the documentation. This particular document is handwritten because it's done in a surgery center. It doesn't use an EMR, which is a little challenging. But there are things that are missing, like a pre-op nurse not signing a document. We've got the nerve palsy, which we've got positioning, we've got, the approach, which is more of a surgical side, more of a surgeon side, which we've seen enough surgeries to know that, all right, this is, expected or complication, right? Or we've got a wrong side surgery where you've got missing documentation, right? The nurse never signed the pre-op documentation. So nurse actually go through and verify the H&P, the imaging, things like that. So that happens. I'll give you an example of an expert case. The case has already happened. I flew to another state to get up on the stand in front of a jury. I mean, it was kind of crazy, but the techs were deposed in this case, and it was a missing lap, right? So, reading
just terrifies me.
Right. It's real. It happens. So reading the depositions of the techs, the nurses, I feel for them because those are my people, right? What the heck happened is what I say. How the heck happened, right? So you go based on their story and then you look at the documentation. Things were missing in the documentation to really tell the story, right? So in this case, it was a multi-surgery procedure. And things like, if you have enough time to document that you've taken a time out in each procedure, chances are you've had enough time to have counted between each procedure. Okay?
Uh-huh.
There's no documentation that counts were done between each procedure. There you go.
Man. So you had an initial count and a closing count. That was it, right?
So yes. So when I'm looking at those things, I'm looking at all of the layers of our documentation. Like, why wasn't a count not done between the procedures? You look at the times in and out. I know sometimes we're like, we in and out times. It matters, guys. It matters. Were you in the room when this surgeon came in the room and that surgeon left the room? Were you there? Was someone giving you a break? Those times actually really matter. And those are the times that I looked at, to correlate the story of when that surgeon came in, when that surgeon came out, in and out. And the things like, well, they did a timeout for each procedure. So why wasn't there more documentation? So that is incredibly important. And I know for me in my everyday life in the OR, we have our weekly meetings. And ever since I've become a legal nurse, every Wednesday, I will say, hey guys, make sure you, like I said earlier, you're looking at the H&P, you're looking at the imaging, and you're verifying. And if there's any question, speak up. And then, of course, I say, hey, guys, it's called universal protocol. We all learned it, but we forget or we get comfortable. And I think in a lot of cases, we get very comfortable. This is what I see. We get very comfortable with our family, with our OR family. We know, you guys know, it's a different world back there. We get very comfortable with them, which is a great thing. But when it comes to documentation, you can't get comfortable. You really, really have to include everything. And positioning. I will tell you, there are many, many cases out there that are positioning related. Now, we can position the most perfect way possible, but if we didn't document how we positioned, there's no way to really tell, right? The patient, and we don't see the patient after that. So the patient ends up with a nerve injury. You go back to the documentation. Well, how were they positioned? And if there's really no documentation, I don't really know. I've also heard people say, well, I was told that if I the least amount of documentation I put, the better, right? It protects
I was told
us.
that too, actually. Yeah.
I was told that back in the day too.
Yeah.
Okay, as the tech, I'm shocked. Like,
I know.
I'm just going to say,
the
like,
more you chart, the more
be
can be held against you is kind of the idea.
That is correct.
Okay.
But I totally disagree with that because it becomes a thing called, failure to document.
Yeah. And I can't defend my actions. If I don't have it documented, I can't.
And we can all
anything.
say that, by the time a case comes around, you don't remember things, which is the truth. You don't remember things. But you also are a really good nurse and you protected that patient and you put gel pads under the heels and you put an axillary roll in the right position and you moved cords around so that they weren't impinging anywhere. It's up to you to show what kind of an amazing nurse you are, right? That's not going to be held against you. And it goes back to, you know what? If you should be doing it right anyway. So why wouldn't you document that, right? Like, what are we trying to hide?
Well,
we're doing it right,
Specifically in the operating room too, there are some surgical procedures that we do so quickly, but yet the amount of information you all have to document doesn't change. And the speed at which you have to do it. Like, I have literally witnessed nurses, like, we are rolling out and turning over the room, and you all are still trying to document intraoperatively, things that happen. I would imagine just at that speed, just, the human factor, sometimes things get missed, or in an EMR, like a box is going to be clicked that maybe shouldn't
absolutely.
have
And that's
clicked.
taken into consideration, right? You go, okay, this case length of time, I personally would tell the attorney, well, these cases are 5-minute cases. We call them 5-minute cases, right? These cases are 5-minute cases. So there's really this lack of time. But if the case is 8 hours,
right, you had time.
There was time. Yeah. Yeah. And that's, it's realistic.
Yeah. And the thing that's concerning too, I know that you and I talked about this before we actually came on the air, but we were talking about that case where the timeouts were documented, but the counts weren't. The whole issue was there was a retained sponge, yet documented that all of the counts were correct. And we hear time and time again about the high percentage of documented correct counts when there's actually a retained sponge. And it's terrifying to think about it. So just to also connect that to our awareness and our vigilance for safety and actually ensuring that we are counting and we are ensuring that it's actually correct.
Yeah. Here's a fun fact for that. I was asked, how can you guarantee that the laps or the sponges are not in the patient? How can you guarantee that? It's a good question.
That's a great question.
Right? Well, do you have a scanner? No, you don't have a scanner. How can you guarantee that? So, this didn't exist when I first got into, but those bags that you hang, right?
That is a guarantee. Yeah.
Every sponge in that bag before the patient leaves the room, that is a guarantee. And that is considered an adjunct technology. It was before we had scanners.
I did not realize that those were considered an adjunct technology. And yet, as you say that, you're
deeply,
like, I can see that.
Yeah.
And you can, it's because you can visualize it. I mean, you can visualize the blood loss.
Right.
Right. But then you see that, you do the 5-finger with the laps. And then they are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then they wad them all up into a ball, and then they shove them into one pocket, right? Especially in our training. I know, because I'm scrubbed in.
Standard.
But you've seen them do that. And then they shove them into that one pocket during a transplant or a cardiac surgery. Because, so you're
the standard of care is
that's not it.
Each one gets their own pocket. And that is how you can guarantee. So, did you guarantee before the patient left the room that every sponge was in that bag? No, because you and I both know that doesn't happen.
One was still inside the patient. Yeah.
Right.
So that doesn't happen. But if you want to make sure to guarantee, then make sure you put them in the bags at the very least.
So smart.
Yeah. Okay. So we are coming down to the end of this conversation. And before we wrap up, I'm curious, how do you, as a clinical person, translate what you see in a chart to non-clinical people when you're in court? How do you communicate?
I'm going to say, this is the theme of the episode, as you're telling a story. So when I am translating, because a lot of times, again, it's just behind the scenes, attorneys will tell you that they understand their medical side of it. Right. And they really, really try their best, but they didn't go to nursing school. They don't spend every day. Just like I didn't go to law school. I don't understand everything about law. But what I do is I take the documentation and I put it into a story that they can understand. Right. We define things. There's a lot of definitions involved. So like, what is a COLI? Here's the definition. But really, it's taking that documentation and creating a story around it of what happened in that patient's journey. And that's how you translate it. And so if you think of it when you're documenting that way, then it makes my life easier. Or it won't be reviewing your chart.
And that's the goal. As cool as Anna is, don't want to meet her in a courtroom. I do not want to be reading
your chart. No, I do not.
Yeah, I don't ever want my chart reviewed because of a mistake. And So these kinds of conversations are so helpful to help us really understand the gravity of the responsibility that we have when we are documenting. Even though documentation can be so frustrating and feel like it's pulling us away from patient care, there's a purpose in it too. And seeing that greater purpose is helpful. So Anna, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today.
Yeah. I hope it helps. I hope it helps. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's definitely going to help. Very eye-opening. And I think people will have a greater understanding and appreciation of that chart that they got to go sit and furiously type in before the next case. So.
I know. I feel you. Trust me, I do.
That was Anna Gray, RNFA and legal nurse consultant from California. And I learned so much, again, in this conversation today. And one thing I appreciate is this idea that our documentation is telling a patient's story. It actually is connected to a person. Even if we get frustrated with how much we have to document at times, there's actually a connection and it can tell the story of the patient experience. I really thought that was really cool. But on top of that, to blow my mind that the sponge counter bags are actually considered an adjunct technology. I had no idea.
No. And I mean, you wouldn't think about that, but it's in our world, the counts are so important. And Melanie, I can't tell you, I still fight that fight all the time. Like, don't trust me that much. Please watch me count. Please.
Right. Yes.
It takes two people. But you mentioned an interesting statistic.
So here's what's
not even always right.
I know, right? So it's not. Even though we document correct counts time and time again, research has shown that when there has been a retained surgical sponge, the count was actually documented as correct. And so to have this, we think it was correct. We counted, but all we did was me and you count and look, and we're human. We can make a mistake. So this depending on and leaning on something else, an adjunct technology, something as simple as our sponge counter bags that we can visualize every one of our sponges, or the bigger technologies with the scanners and the mats and all the other things that they can do. It's one of the reasons why AORN is recommending the use of an adjunct technology along with counting. Because of that high percentage of time when the sponge is retained, we thought it was correct. So to take that risk away. But anyway, it's just, we could continue this conversation for, I think, another episode. Another episode. So we won't. But just to remember the importance of our documentation and the connection to the patient and the story it's telling, I think that is phenomenal. So that is going to do it for today's episode. Stay tuned next week as Chris and I continue answering the whys as we discuss some different practices that we've seen in our operating rooms. Some good, some not so good, but we're going to tackle them and talk about them. So join us again next week. On behalf of Chris, myself, and our whole team, thanks for listening to First Case.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of First Case. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing to First Case on your favorite podcast app or by downloading the smartphone app on iPhone or Android. Simply search for First Case in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@firstcasemedia.com. We look forward to hearing from you.